I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Maryland's 2026 legislative session started this Wednesday, January 14th. The governor presents his budget this coming week. Apart from the difficult budget and energy issues, housing is on top of the agenda. Last year, Governor Westmore's housing bills were defeated in no small part due to the efforts of the Maryland Association of Counties, or MACO as it is known, the lobbying group that represents the state's 23 counties and Baltimore City. The argument they presented then was that the loss of local autonomy from the state bills and the state's plan for a one-size-fits-all mandated solution was not good policy. Following that failure, both sides, it seems, got back to work, and this time around, MACO appears to be more supportive of the governor's housing agenda. The governor has mentioned three bills. First, the Maryland Transit and Housing Opportunity Act, which eliminates minimum parking requirements in developments close to transit stations and opens about 300 acres of state-owned land for housing near transit. A second bill, the Starter and Silver Homes Act, will allow attached townhomes to be built in single-family home zoned areas statewide and enable single-family zoned lots to be subdivided also statewide. Both controversial ideas. There is a third bill, the Housing Certainty Act, which will constrain housing policy changes once development projects are approved. You would think this would be a no-brainer, but it is not that simple. To break down the issues and MACO's own optimistic view of the housing bills this year, we have the organization's executive director and longtime Annapolis hand, Michael Sanderson. Stay with us.
Walked this road about 1,000 times. You think by now I would have got it right. Broken pieces to pick up again. Cycle back to where we began. But I love the high. Coming home to you every time.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Montgomery County native and now DC-based singer-songwriter Kara Levchenko's two new single releases, I Don't Mind and Tell Me What You Want. You can find her and her music at karalevchenko.com.
Suffocating, but I love the high. Coming home to you every time. Like a moth drawn to a flame.
Michael Sanderson, welcome back to I Hate Politics.
Thanks very much for having me back. Always enjoyed chatting with you.
The governor has announced a set of three housing bills that he's bringing this year or supporting. Not all of them are his.
Right.
This comes on the heels from last year when the bills that he had proposed failed, in part because of opposition from MACO, Maryland Association of Counties. What is different about this year's bills as compared to last year's bills? Why are you happier this time?
We've seen some preliminary drafts. I'll isolate one piece that's going to be in one of the three bills that the governor has spoken about and intends to support. I think it's coming in from private legislative sponsors, but it's still kind of part of this larger package. And it's about the term of art is either like regulatory certainty or approval certainty or vested rights or other words along those lines. So this gets a little technical, but if you're not in the planning and zoning universe, the general idea is at some point, if you're trying to build a project, you should be entitled to, okay, what's done is done. We've said yes. Now go forth under the rules in place as of today. And you don't have to worry if things change in a year or in 3 years, you don't have to play by the new rules. You play by today's rules. The builders community in particular really focused on this. This is something they've been interested in for years and years. And in all candor, sometimes that has felt like too much for a supermajority Democratic General Assembly to say, we want to have these builders get all these crazy rights and privileges. This became a central issue, not at the beginning of last session, but at the end. With like 10 days to go in the 90-day session, suddenly this was probably the most important element in the bill that made it out of the House of Delegates and landed in the Senate for basically, I mean, they were almost in a take it or leave it timetable. And ultimately, the Senate decided to take that out of the bill. The bill ends up sort of imploding and nothing passes. But now that we've had 6 or 8 months to work through the nuts and bolts of how that would work, lots of technical questions about how you could rewrite state law to provide a smoother approval path for builders. I think we're closer to a compromise on that. We're going to be introducing with friendly legislators a bill that has a version of this regulatory certainty that we've been working with the builders on. The administration has their own version, but like we're much closer to a center point after having this stew for a while and a lot of back and forth.
If you're approved under a certain set of rules, you don't change the rules on anybody. That's a principle that we defend. The problem is that when it comes to development projects, a lot of developers will hold land rights and then wait for the market to catch up. And so the problem is they are sitting on preliminary approvals and nothing is getting built for sometimes years and years and years. The jurisdiction that wants to see building activity, they are trying to break that logjam. If you are saying, as a consequence of this bill, that the preliminary approval now, whenever you get those rules that were there in place, will be there forever, even if you are not building, then it defeats the purpose. So where is the balance? How did you find that balance?
I think you set that up beautifully, because this gets right to, even if you're not a land use expert, I think a person with common sense can start to understand how this gets tricky. And like what I didn't lay out is that Maryland already grants vested rights. It's just a question of when does your clock start. In Maryland, it starts once you put a footer in the ground. Once you do some meaningful work on the project, then you're locked in, and that's effectively forever. The debate now is, should that lock in sooner, like when the county or the city signs off on your final plan and says, yes, go ahead. And you raise exactly the kind of thing that our local professionals in planning and development are worried about, is sort of zombie projects that, well, we're trying to do the land use plan for our city or for our county. And we're doing we're going through the process the state requires us to do with a comprehensive plan. And this area had previously been a pro-growth area as of 10 years ago, but now the water and sewer plan actually looks more favorable on the south side of town rather than the north side of town. And we want to change our focus of development and try and emphasize there, not here. Oh, but we've got 4 projects who have vested rights from 7 or 17 years ago, and now we have to sort of draw a mark around them and say, no, they still get allowed to grow based on the 2006 law or the 2016 law or whatever. That's just a really tough way to be doing smart growth and to respond to community concerns. So like the middle ground for this year might be start a clock sooner when you get your approval for your project, but that lasts for like 5 years. Not forever, but this won't be the full vested rights, but the county can't change the rules for 5 years after they've said yes to the project.
For example, in Montgomery County, we have a lot of permits out, a lot of preliminary approvals out for building new homes, especially multifamily homes. But they're not being built. They're not being built.
Right.
And a big part of that is because the construction costs, whether it's interest costs or whether it's actual material costs, wages, all of them are not working out for them.
For sure.
And so the developers are waiting. Will the Housing Certainty Act tie the hands of counties from being able to do things that actually break this logjam?
I don't think anybody's putting stuff on the table that's going to be counterproductive here. The idea of a smoother approval path for builders that's going to last beyond this housing cycle, when we have an agreement on yes, it's going to get those projects more rapidly built and make it smoother. The ones that fall apart for finances are still going to fall apart for finances, and there's not much of anything that Annapolis can do about that project. But for the one that's kind of stuck in, it may or may not violate our smart growth law about school capacity, these are the ones where maybe you can say, okay, you're locked in with a yes, you get a 5-year window, you can build, go ahead.
So it's basically a adequate public facilities ordinance issue that it is addressing, not the other things I was talking about, construction costs. Because, there are efforts both in Annapolis and in the counties to provide construction finance to help some of these projects go through. I mean, some of the most celebrated projects, especially in Montgomery County, are affordable ones that are county funded.
Right. And building places where we've got the infrastructure, and then at what point do you say we damn the torpedoes, is kind of the central debate in this whole array of bills. So I use adequate public facilities laws as my example. It's the easiest one to explain. And Maryland law has encouraged our local governments for years, when you don't have the pipes, when you don't have the schools, when you don't have the roads, stop building until you do. That sounds great, but the state's not keeping up on school construction. We got hundreds of millions of dollars worth of projects every year that are ready to go that the state can't fund. And it's either the county picks up all the freight and hopes the state will pay us back later, or the project just sits and waits. And that's happening lots of places. So we have slow investment in infrastructure is another component to why we can't build in some places that we might like to.
All right, let's talk about the other bill that actually has a draft available already,
right,
which is called the Starter and Silver Home Act, which is an effort to allow smaller homes. It says you cannot disallow a townhouse in a single-family zoned area. Secondly, you must also allow, the counties and the jurisdiction must also allow subdividing of a plot in a single-family area.
I think there will be some probably difference of opinion about how widely that policy applies. This is the sort of thing that's happened in a big city here or there across the country, that a major city through its city council says heretofore every place zoned residential is open to multifamily. But that's like inside a city where you've got capacity for water and sewer, you already have high density infrastructure and so forth. I think it's a different question in areas where you've got limited infrastructure, like back to adequate public facilities laws. Maybe we've got an area that's zoned effectively single family, because that's the number of units that we can support on our water and wastewater system. We've got capacity for another 400 units. And so this many square miles, if it were developed into single family, would be about 400 units, and we can handle that many flushes. But if you turn that same area into half of it more compact multifamily, apartment buildings or townhomes or whatever, and it's no longer 400 units, now it's 1,100 units, have you overwhelmed the pipes and you've created an infrastructure crisis, even if you didn't explicitly say, we're going to do an end run around these growth limitations. So like we got to try and get the balance right on that question, I think. And then it just sort of isolates the question of, is this good policy for everywhere or just specific areas in the state?
What is the balance that makes sense from your point of view?
I think we'll have a window for reasonable people to disagree how widely this policy of multifamily and more dense residential should apply. I think something can happen here, and we'll have concerns raised by local governments, but I don't think this will be line in the sand kind of stuff coming from our side.
How do you narrow this from going from statewide to certain areas? So can you say, for example, that we will have this rule only for infill development, which is, not as opposed to greenfield development, which is new development altogether, land that doesn't have homes and you build homes?
I think probably attaching this policy to something that makes sense is probably the right place to land. I think the governor's bill is going to focus on areas that already have both public water and sewer service. So that gets you out of the business of thinking, let's take this farm area, where right now the rule is you can have 7 units developed on septic on a giant old family farm. We're not going to turn that into an 80-unit apartment complex. I don't think anybody thinks that's the kind of new housing growth that we want to really spur. We have a definition in state law of priority funding areas, which is about density and sewer service and other stuff like that. Maybe attach it to that definition, or you go to someplace like existing density.
Of the two substantive provisions in the Starter and Silver Homes Act, one being townhouses should be allowed where land is zoned for single-family homes, and secondly, single-family zoned land should be able to be subdivided. Which of those two are more controversial from your point of view?
They get at the same issue about community, direction and control, and they really get at the same issue about unplanned density. I've been talking about them as one issue.
I would imagine townhomes, if they are connected, you'll have to give them a variance over setbacks. But with the dividing of the plot, I think the setbacks are still in place.
If it looks like the General Assembly wants to move a bill to really allow a half-acre plot by right, divide this into 3 units, then you have to look at setbacks and say, okay, we can't just allow whatever the old rule was, because you literally won't have space for 3 buildings. So those things probably go hand in hand as you sort that stuff out, I think.
So the last of the bills that at least has been announced is the Maryland Transit and Housing Opportunity Act.
Right.
What have you heard? What are you happy about? What are you not so happy?
What we're talking about here is mostly the area right around a high-frequency rail station. So if it's a metro station or a MARC station or a place that's got regular through the day service, in theory, you should be building density around those spots with an eye toward you could live next to the station and have that be your primary transportation into DC, into Baltimore. The idea is, let's take transit-oriented development and try and greenlight as much as we can, particularly for housing in the area immediately around a highly used rail station. I'm sure there's going to be a case here or a case there where you might need to iron out a quirk. But in general, I don't think we're going to have deep philosophical pushback from local governments saying, no, we want untouched, virgin property around the rail station. I don't think anybody's really seeking that. It's a natural and sensible place to end up with some higher density and some residential. It sounds like the governor also wants to fold those areas into a program we call enterprise zones, which is generally underdeveloped areas. Let's give a 10-year tax break that the state and counties share basically the financial responsibilities for. And it's another way to sort of light a fire there and get things moving.
What are obvious places where this can happen?
I don't think this is something that Allegheny County is sitting on edge waiting to see what happens with transit-oriented development. This is in the metropolitan areas of the state, which candidly really do have the most growth pressure. Most of the pressure for added housing capacity really is in the whatever, 8 or 9 jurisdictions in the middle part of the state. There are places here and there, and you can grow some more in and around Salisbury or around Elkton or whatever. But for the most part, we know where the growth pressure and opportunities are. So but to have some of it centered on a metro line or on a MARC train line, just I think makes sense for most everybody.
I would imagine Prince George's is prime target for this kind of thing, but also Charles
would love to be plugged in to mass transit enough for this to be a policy question for Charles. So as a practical matter, they would love to have a more direct mass transit connection for the bedroom communities in Charles, who right now they're driving up Route 5 and so forth to get into DC. But for today, it's probably more Prince George's and Anne Arundel and Baltimore County and Montgomery and so forth. I think that's probably where most of this is clicking today.
You didn't mention the fastest growing county in the state, Frederick.
Frederick, right. Are we going to run a metro line all the way to Frederick one day? Maybe. I don't know what the transportation solution is on the 270 corridor, and I don't think anybody does. We've had various ideas of, throw a couple $100 million and see what a vendor can come up with, and monorails down the middle of the highway, and like every variation to the extent that major transit makes its way into the exurbs beyond just the suburbs. Then sure, this would be a Charles and Frederick and Queen Anne and Cecil County issue too. Yeah.
Or Brunswick.
Sure.
There's MARC already there.
I don't know the details there, but if the service in Brunswick meets the standard of you can actually live right by that station, then maybe that is an area that makes sense. Could be.
We talk about housing a lot. Obviously, we are interested in that. But in the larger development category are data centers.
Oh, yeah.
There is quite a bit of pressure now to allow more data centers across the state. Do you think there will be something that does that? And will that be wrapped, with this? Or is that completely separate from your point of view?
I think it's philosophically separate from the press for housing. But I would say it's another issue that's significant enough that I don't think policymakers can just ignore it. But it's different here. As a practical matter, local governments don't really need much from the state to make to basically open our doors for data centers. Like Frederick County, just outside of Frederick, there's an area that's an old brownfield site that looked like it was never going to get redeveloped, and now they've got a campus that's going to have 3 or 4 data centers. They're the first Maryland jurisdiction to jump on this. They made a big presentation at the last MACO conference, and the room was absolutely jam-packed. Folks wanted to hear the nuts and bolts of what is that going to look like? What is it going to mean for taxes and service and public safety and all this kind of stuff? So it's a hot issue. I will say data centers are coming. We all love the AI toys. They require lots of number crunching. So we need big, cool, thirsty, energy suck buildings to run this stuff. And if Maryland doesn't build them, somebody else is going to, right? They're going to Virginia, they're going to Pennsylvania, more in Northern Virginia. They're coming.
Yeah, well, so yes, but what I think the part that speaks to me is, should electricity now be part of adequate public facilities ordinance?
Right. I think it's going to be an attractive debate for a state like Maryland. So we're in the middle of a debate right now where they're trying to build a transmission line to carry tons of power from Pennsylvania down to Northern Virginia to feed these power-hungry data centers. And the other trend is the Amazon and Microsoft and the other companies who want to build data centers, or they want to have a vendor build them a data center, are looking to power plants and saying, can we just co-locate and buy the energy directly from you and pull it off the grid for the regular users?
I had Senator Feldman and Delegate Corman on the show, 2 of the energy chairs.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
And they both are not going to do that. I mean, they are clear.
Right. Yes, but, right? I mean, the market for electricity doesn't conveniently stop at the borders of Montgomery County or the state of Maryland. Maryland can say, let's make a new policy that if you want to locate one of these energy-hungry facilities in our state, you need to bring your own power, or you can only do it if you get a sign-off that we've got capacity to handle it. That's fine. The company will just locate right above us in Pennsylvania. I mean, this question of affordability, which I think this housing debate is really a subchapter of a larger debate about affordability, but it's also like location decisions. And that company can serve the same kind of clients and the same users with a facility that's right in Martinsburg, West Virginia, or Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, than if it were in Hagerstown or in Montgomery County.
I heard they were planning a data center in Calvert between or very close to the power plants, to the nuclear power plants.
Yeah, the plan has been floated to co-locate one or more data centers right at Calvert Cliffs. And again, this sounds like it's technical jargon, but the idea would be with a long-term agreement that we're going to buy your first electrons, and then the rest you can sell to the open market and let random people from Maryland have, but we'll get it even before the grid.
Well, just to be clear, that's not how electrons move.
There's a practical difference. If you have an agreement with a power generator who are unregulated companies, power generation is not regulated in this state and about half of the United States. So if you're a power generator, you can just say, I'm not selling to the grid anymore. I'm not going to supply the general grid. I'm going to sell to whoever gives me a contract. And if Amazon shows up and says, we will buy all your electricity for the next 10 years at an attractive rate, and we'll promise to do that, you might cut that deal and tell the Public Service Commission, by the way, we're out. You tell the multi-state entity, PJM, we're no longer contributing to the the overall grid like we used to because we got a sweetheart deal.
It is interesting. So electricity versus schools, right? And so adequate public facilities in sewers and roads. I mean, it's so now we are adding a fourth sort of category to adequate public facilities.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think there are a lot of parallels there. These issues are at least echoing each other, if not the same. Yeah.
Michael, are you expecting anything else on housing development, any sort of financing, especially around construction?
We've already seen a couple of bills in the pre-filed legislation, basically trying to take public financing programs and inject them into more housing opportunities. So I think there'll be a debate that's trying to get into those market forces that are bigger than local permitting and bigger than local zoning, but this project just won't pencil out. Well, what if we came in and did a loan guarantee? Or what if we gave you your first $4 million up front on a $90 million project? Would that help you through it? That kind of stuff. So I think we'll see debates around that stuff. And I mentioned earlier, local governments are going to be behind some bills. We sort of cast around, beat the bushes and saying, what things haven't we been talking about that could be pro-housing? And how could we change local tax codes? How could we simplify local processes, give us some more flexibility? A lot of this stuff is written in state law, and we would need the state to change. So we'll have a far-reaching bill that tries to put some more options on the table that go on beyond just planning and zoning stuff. So it's a big, broad debate.
We had a new project open in Silver Spring in Montgomery County, and we did a segment on this, where it was all affordable. It was, significantly funded by the county. Mm-hmm. I think the total project cost was $55 million or so. Of that, $25 million came from LIHTC, which is the low-income housing tax credit. Another $9 million came from Montgomery County itself. So the bulk of the financing is sort of government-driven. And then each unit cost was like $550,000. We are not getting affordable in effect. And if you end up selling that for $350,000 for something that you spent $550 to build, how long are you going to support this with public money?
I think you're swimming upstream there. I mean, back to this issue of the market forces are by far the biggest issue in the housing crisis. And we can work around the edges and try and make our regulatory process as smooth as possible. We can take as many public dollars as we can scrap together and try and help to finance or help accelerate a project here or there. that the private market wouldn't be able to support, but public money gets it there. But you're like, it's really tough as an ROI. Like, I don't think as a practical matter, the solution lies in public money just building units and becoming the proprietors of more and more housing. And that's the solution.
Michael Sanderson, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Find me in the crowd tonight, tongue-tied. Dance with me under cotton candy skies. We can leave the pain of the past behind, lean into the moment, dancing the night away. We can have whatever we want, start a renaissance. I could be a confidant, baby, won't you tell me what you
That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. Don't forget to tune in to our Tuesday morning news analysis. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics and government and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Montgomery County native and now DC-based singer-songwriter Kara Levchenko's two new single releases, I Don't Mind and Tell Me What You Want. You can find her and her music at karalevchenko.com. I hope you will subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
go to bed. We can watch all the colored lights again.